Hey there, and welcome. This is the Fedora Podcast, episode number 35. Today, we're going to be introducing you to our community architect. I don't remember if I introduced myself. Hi, I'm Eric, the IT guy Hendricks. I kind of blew my usual introduction. How does that happen? Years of podcasting. Anyway, welcome. I know it's been a kind of a crazy schedule. I know we've been kind of on and off the air, but we are trying to be back. Summer ended up being a little crazy for a bunch of us, but it's for good reason, I promise. Uh, in fact, today we've got an exciting episode talking to Justin Flory. We'll talk a little bit about what the Fedora Community Architect does, as well as a little bit of a sneak peek about what's coming up here in a few weeks. FYI, it's Fedora Flock. So if you're not sure what Flock is, or if you want to get a little bit of information on what's going on, you've come to the right place, to the right podcast. That's also part of the reason why we shifted our schedule around a little bit. We wanted to make sure to talk about Flock ahead of time. But don't worry, we'll be talking about Bootsy and building Fedora images using Bootsy here in about 27 days, give or take. So not the next episode, but the episode after that, once everyone's back from Flock. Anyway, y'all didn't log in to hear me ramble on about show schedules. So with that said, let me bring in our guest. Justin, welcome to the Fedora Podcast. It's been a while.
Yeah, thanks. I'm really happy to be here with you, Eric.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Good conversation today. But for those that haven't met you socially, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, so my name is Justin Flory. My journey in Fedora started in 2015. I was actually just finishing high school then and was going up to move to college. I was going into networking and systems administration after kind of starting to dabble with Linux and open source a little bit while I was in high school. And my first interaction with the Fedora community came as I was getting ready to move up to my undergraduate program. It just so happened that 9 years ago, the the Flock event was happening in Rochester, New York that year. And so I was, moving up for my freshman year. I was interested in Fedora and had kind of been hanging out in the channel, the IRC channels and the mailing lists. I'd kind of been lurking. But anyways, I decided I was going to move up a week early to Rochester, new city, new place, but I was going to check out this Fedora Flock thing and see what Fedora is really all about. And here I am 9 years later. But so I started to get involved with Fedora a bit, kind of got to know the community for the first time there at that Flock in 2015, but I've been involved with the community since then, doing all kinds of various things around a lot of the non-engineering teams in Fedora, which we often call mindshare teams. Some of my earlier contributions, I helped run the marketing team with Gabrielle Trombini and Eduard Lucina, helped build the community operations team with Remy de Cosmaker and Bhagyashree Padalkar and Sachin Kamath, helped build the diversity, equity, and back then it was just the diversity team. Now it's the DEI team. But we helped kind of build out some of our early approach to how we do our DEI events in the community in 2016. And then I've done a lot of other various things here and there across the community. I maintain the Zork package. If you know Zork, that 1980s text-based adventure game, you can run and install that on Fedora right now. And if you happen to have a bug, you can come and talk to me, but I don't know if I can fix it for you because that's that's some old code right there.
Oh gosh,
I do a lot of
I might
other
have to go
things.
install it after the show just to recapture my youth.
You totally should. It was actually a really cool collaboration story. I had to work with someone to fix it because it was broken in GCC, and I worked in the Fedora Telegram channel, got this patch. We actually upstreamed it into Zork. It was really cool. But yeah, you can run and install Zork today on Fedora, and that is my package. So
I have it in my Steam library, but I think I'll have to install your package instead.
There you go. Just run it on Fedora in the command line. It even will save your game data. It's that cool. But in 2022, or more specifically October 2022, after being both as a student and working, and after I graduated, I was working with the UNICEF Office of Innovation for a couple of years. I joined Red Hat in October 2022 as the Fedora Community Architect. And that began my journey with Fedora as a Red Hatter. I've been in the community for quite a while before then. But that's a little bit about how I got to where I am today. Started, just checking out this Fedora open source community kind of thing, thinking I was going to go to school for engineering and computer networking, and then went in a completely different direction. But I'm so grateful for the way things ended up working out there.
I was having this conversation with a college student the other day about how linear the progression of my career has felt, from um, help desk, desktop support, to systems administration, to Linux admin, to engineer, to sales, and then ultimately marketing. Um, and it seems so linear now, but going through it seems like none of these things talk to each other. So it's always exciting to connect with another technologist and go, yeah, this is what I thought I was going to do, and years later realize that's not what I ended up doing at all. But like you, I can't complain, and it's been an awesome journey. So um excuse me. Now, you're not, just because you gave us your full life history doesn't mean you get out of the next question. It's one of our crowd favorites. What do you do for fun when you're not Fedora-ing or working? What are you doing?
So I'll also say this just because I was going through this recently, but I am a big fan of optical media. So I do a little bit of record collecting. So I love to go to the record stores, go through all the bins, but specifically I actually look for CDs because I have some free software in Fedora. I've actually got this whole pipeline of how I go from the CD, I rip it to a lossless audio format using free software, get that into my library on Fedora Linux, and use SyncThing to put that over to Android, where I pull it into VLC. But part of that is this whole kind of pipeline of, for me, music is a really important part of my life. And I love to spend time going through record stores, going through these bins of, kind of the weird stuff that people aren't really looking through. So I try to find, when I'm going out for music, I look for one thing that's maybe something I'm actually looking for. And then I just try to find something that's just so different or out of my usual kind of thing. Sometimes I get some really weird stuff, but sometimes I found some really cool things too. So if you can't find me at home doing Fedora things, then I might be out at the record store doing some bin searching there.
That is, I've been podcasting for 5-6 years, and I've asked dozens of guests that question and never quite got that answer. That is super nerdy, and I love every bit of it. I'm a bit of a music junkie, but way back in the day, it was, LimeWire. But nowadays, Apple Music does what I need it to. So, but yeah, that's really cool. I tried to get into vinyl records. I was going to have this big collection and decided that I don't like clutter, and I listen to so many different types of music, and usually only the top hits. So it's I don't know if albums are really the way I want to go. There's maybe 6 albums ever that I've listened to 80% of the songs on. And it's just, so I applaud you for your dedication.
It's also a good shout out for the Music Brains open source project, which is a open source music Wikipedia. So oftentimes I'll pick up stuff and then I'll go contribute, add the metadata into the open source Music Brains database. Really cool project. So I just felt that was a perfect chance to give them a shout out.
Nice. I love the shameless plug. Love it. All right, so I want to be respectful of your time, and we can talk about music and open source and hobbies all day long. But the burning question today is, what in the world is community operations? And so how did this idea come along, and what do you see community operations as?
Yeah, so there's, I guess, in this chapter and how it looks like in Fedora, there's kind of the conversation of how it began, and then some of the more recent conversations about where it's going today. So back in 2015, it was a different open source landscape back then. Fedora was just coming past its 10th anniversary. We still had probably weren't that far beyond GNOME 3 and Systemd at that time. But So, community operations began from this idea that, it was originally kind of planted by Remy de Cosmaker, who was the first Fedora community architect who worked at Red Hat. And, as I understood this a team, because it kind of started to come about in 2015, it was really about getting these different teams in Fedora to be more effective at collaborating and working together. Not that that's something that we struggle with in the Fedora community. I think that actually is, in open source communities, we do really great work at being collaborators. It's kind of what you have to do to build a distro. But in a lot of our non-engineering teams, like if you know the Fedora governance structure, you know that we have this engineering steering committee that kind of governs what kind of decisions and what new things are entering the distribution, like what major changes are entering the project. And while it's not a perfect like governance that captures all the engineering things that happen out there in Fedora, it does kind of bring that like common forum that this is like the one place where, as far as the engineering changes go, this is like the last frontier where things get decided and figured out. On the non-engineering side of Fedora, we don't quite have something like that, at least back in 2015, when this is where we're starting this conversation from. And so this community operations or ComOps team came about as kind of being an answer to some of these very operational tasks that need to happen in a community. Working together with, coordinating for events and working with, marketing and design team to think about what's our strategy and our approach for working and trying to grow and promote Fedora and bring new people into the community. So at the time when the team began, we really focused on trying to provide, community infrastructure, kind of playing on that DevOps. That was really when DevOps was a really fresh term. So it's kind of playing on that with community ops, ComOps. But like one of the first things that we did as that team was we launched the Fedora community blog, which is still a resource that's used today. And we get all kinds of useful information about what's happening inside the contributor community there. So that was a big function of like what the team had started to do, as kind of one example of helping the community be effective at working together, but also helping us tell our stories about what we're doing in our project, because Fedora is so huge. Like it's impossible for anyone, not even Matthew Miller knows like everything that's happening in Fedora at any given moment, because there's just so many different corners of our project in our community. So in the beginning, that's what the community operations team was trying to target, is trying to think about how could we, as our project is growing and scaling and, we're trying to bring more people in, how can we make it easier and facilitate that collaboration and make it more natural for folks? Because it's not always an obvious thing for people, especially when you're not often meeting people for the first time face to face, where you can go and have a coffee with someone and talk it through. Back then it was an IRC channel and this, and you don't know if someone's there or not when you're messaging them, or you're going to a mailing list and you put your, draft your email out and read it 5 times, and then you send it out to the list and wait to see what happens. So, so that was kind of the vision of where things started. And we did a lot of great work as a team back then. We did a lot of early work around metrics. One of the people I mentioned, B. Padalkar, she did this really, like one example, I really love this one, is that for FOSDEM. FOSDEM is this big event that happens in Belgium in February every year. It's a big kind of open European forum of conference of open source and free software. And we've had a booth there for over a decade. Like we've been going there for a long time. We've got a lot of history there. And so in 2016, what B did was she, as part of like a team exercise, looked at the Fedora badge system. So we also have this badging system. You get to do all these kind of things in the community, like, oh, you built a package for our Koji, our build system, or, you wrote an article for the Fedora magazine. Well, we also have badges for going to an event, and you're like, hey, like you came up to our booth and you scan a QR code. Great job. You get an event, a badge on your Fedora profile. So what she did was she looked at the data from people who just came up and scanned our, badge, they already have a Fedora account. They're already, involved in Fedora in some way. So she looked at like who scanned our badges, and like before and after FOSDEM, did those people continue to make contributions, or were they not contributing before FOSDEM? Did they start contributing after FOSDEM? And she actually did some really interesting work that showed like kind of the summary of that was like, oh, actually we did kind of a lot, was an activation point for a lot of people who maybe hadn't been engaged for a while. After FOSDEM, they actually ended up doing more in the project in that period after the event than like that long period building up to it. So it was kind of an interesting time that we got to experiment and kind of look at this data and try to play with these things that we already have. And so that was one of the kind of very memorable pieces of work that CommOps did back in those early days, kind of mixing the community and the metrics to do this storytelling piece.
So that was kind of a look at the history of CommOps, and even just looking at the we'll have some links in the show notes, but even just looking at some of the iterations of this role, it's changed quite a bit, but I think the heart of it has stayed the same. It's about engaging with people. There's so many different facets of a project in a community like Fedora. There's of course the businessy kind of side, the interaction with the council. There's working alongside Matthew Miller, but I think the heart and soul of this has always been getting people engaged. And having been a part of the Linux community for, gosh, I don't want to even guess how many years it's been now, since I listened to my first like Linux podcast and joined a Telegram group. It's been over a decade. But Fedora has been one of the most welcoming and enabling of communities that I've ever seen. And that's from someone who stands on the sidelines. I have nothing to do with that. And just getting to watch and that, that's a compliment to the CommOps team and to your work over the last several years. That said, what's keeping you up at night? What are specific priorities that you have for either yourself or for your team?
Oh man. Well, so I talked a little bit about CommOps, and that's one of our teams in Fedora. But before I think I can kind of talk about like what's keeping me up, I feel like it helps to explain a little bit about this kind of community architecture role that we have, both at Red Hat and kind of how that shows up in the community in terms of like, what does this guy do? And, what is this guy doing in Fedora all day, right? So, there's a lot of different dimensions to kind of what my role works. One of the things I had before I came into this role was I had worked very closely with all of the three people who had been in this role previously: Remy DeCosmaker, Brian Exelbeard, Marie Norden. So I got a very, detailed, deep perspective on kind of how each of them took their own personal approach to this role and what their strengths were that added to the Fedora community and how they kind of made it their own. So there's not like a single rule book of like, this is what a community architect is or does, but some of the, let's say, more consistent things that I spend a lot of time on, definitely in terms of kind of that open community engagement, helping run different of our special interest groups or working groups. So lately I've been working a lot with the community operations team, which is having kind of a reboot. We're doing an initiative on that right now. As well as the DEI team. We have an accessibility working group, and we have our community blog editors roundtable. So there's a couple of things that I do just to help make sure things are moving along steadily, that we're, helping prepare meeting agendas, plan action items, build out, triage all of our ongoing tasks, do some of our project management. So there's those kinds of things, which Ben Cotton famously is described as that flywheel theory. It's kind of keeping things moving forward. So there's a lot of that fits into my role. But I also do a lot of events. Events is a huge part, both virtual and in person. Just to name a couple of examples, back in May, we did the Fedora Linux 40 release party, which we did on Matrix for the first time, which was really exciting, taking a page from the Creative Freedom Summit organizers who did a really good job with that. So we got to just kind of follow their rule book or their playbook for that. And we also had the Fedora Week of Diversity event last month, which was also virtual. But then, of course, we've got our in-person events like Flock. That's just going to be a couple weeks away. Flock is probably the biggest one because that is the Fedora contributor show. That's where Fedora people go. But we also have other things like FOSDEM, Lately, we're starting to see kind of a comeback of the GNOME Asia. Well, the event's been going on, but getting Fedora people out to GNOME Asia and using that as a rallying point for some of our folks in the region. So part of what my role is sometimes I'm actually the one, helping organize and run things. Like I've got a great team of people who are helping me for the Flock conference. And then sometimes I'm, helping organize it. Like last year, I helped plan our Fedora presence for GNOME Asia. And then sometimes I'm supporting from afar. I'm working with people who, like our team in California that does the Southern California Linux Expo or Scale. I haven't made it out there yet. I want to one day. But we've got a team of folks out there who have been helping run a Fedora booth. And part of what my role is helping them, make sure that they can plan their event with enough time and get the things they need for stickers and swag and tablecloth and helping promote their talks. All of these kind of work around events kind of fits into a lot of what I do, helping enable that from a Fedora budget perspective, which also fits into, I'd say, kind of the last main consistent pillar, let's say, of my role, which is the budgeting, kind of looking at the project finances, kind of a CFO, I guess, but that feels really weird for me for Fedora. So I try to stay away from some of those executive suite terms because that's not really how an open source community works, especially not Fedora. But that's part of what I help do is trying to think through how we're managing our spend on a project, looking at our community, our infrastructure, how Matrix and Discourse and all these other Weblate, how all these other cool free software communities and projects that we ultimately rely on to help us do what we do in Fedora. I get to help manage some of those relationships and think about how we can build strong connections with other open source communities outside of just the Fedora sphere as well. So those are kind of my three consistent pillars, I think, of how I take my approach into the community architect work. And then, kind of coming back to your original question here of well, what's keeping me up at night? Well, right now it's Flock, that's for sure. That's a big one because it is our big contributor event. So it's different from other conferences where, say, you might be getting stuff that's more user focused or focused on kind of the using of Fedora or Linux or applying it, but it's really centered on our community, our contributor community. So the people who are involved day in and day out of helping to, build the new operating system every 6 months and do all the other things that go around the building of the operating system, promoting it and marketing it and the design aspects, all the visual design, like with this lovely podcast logo that we have, just as one example. So Flock is really a great unifying place for our contributor community. And that's why it gets, we're about less than 2 weeks before the Fedora community will descend upon Rochester in August. So we're just around the corner from that. So that's where obviously a lot of my current time, energy, and focus and sleepless nights are going. Not quite that bad. But it's going to be a really great event. We've got a lot of things that I'm really excited about, both in terms of our schedule and our programming. We've got speakers from, I believe we're coming in around 4 different continents. And we have people who are coming in from all over, and it's we've also got some really fun things planned for people, because Flock is also about us getting together as a contributor community and both connecting with each other and getting real work done, but also it's about kind of spending time together as a community, because so much of what we do is virtual and online. So getting some of that downtime in a casual format, getting to spend time with people that we spend so much of our online time with is also one of the perks of this event. So I'm really excited about it. It's definitely giving me a lot of my time and my focus, but I'm getting really excited. It's just around the corner.
Yeah, I'm very jealous. I wanted to go and just timing and whatnot didn't work out this time around, and it's always a great time. Why don't we take a couple of minutes and really pitch what Flock is? You mentioned contributor conference. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so like I said, there's a user audience. If you go to Southern California Linux Expo or FOSDEM, you're going to get a lot more of that user perspective, I think, in many cases, because it's people who are talking about using Linux and Fedora and other kinds of ways. But at Flock, it's different because our audience is a little bit different. Now, you still might have people who are using Fedora Linux in all these very interesting and unusual ways. But, the common thread that's tying us all together there is that we're involved with this big global community of people who are working on this thing. And, one of the things that I think is really important is also as far as what, helps keep this engine thriving every year and keep going is what comes down to what really comes out at the end of these events to me is those 4 foundations: freedom, friends, features, first, which I think really captures so well, like why we do what we do in the Fedora community. And at Flock, I think that really becomes the centerpiece. Like it really comes out on full display. All the different, from a freedom aspect, all these different things that we're doing and working on in Fedora under free software licenses and working on in an open collaborative way. Features, because we're always trying to stay on the cutting edge of what's happening out there. And at Flock, you'll hear a lot about, what people are working on right now. First as well, because a lot of it's kind of what's new, what's next, what's coming right around the corner. That's always been what we've been doing in Fedora, but especially the friends piece, because we are a community of people from all over the world. And it's hard to speak on behalf of everyone in Fedora, but I feel like a common thing for a lot of us is that we really value who we're doing this work with. And that's always been a really special part of our community. And I think that's a big part of what makes Flock so special, other than all the other cool, exciting technology things that we're doing there too.
So one of the nice things about being a community architect or being in any role, official or otherwise, inside the Fedora community is that you have an entire group of people, an entire virtual village, if you will, of people to lean on. So we talked about some of the things that are keeping you up, but how can the community really reach out and help grow Fedora? How can the community really help you accomplish some of those goals?
Yeah. Well, I feel like there's 2 things I want to cover here. One that I think is just, kind of about participation and leadership in open source. And then one that's thinking about some of the things that are getting me excited for things to get involved with around Fedora today. But I want to give a nod to this talk that Aoife Maloney gave at DevConf CZ just last month. She did this lightning talk. Now, of course, I can't remember the title of it, but it's around kind of the leading by influence. And she's kind of getting at this dynamic that a lot of times in open source communities like Fedora, we're to get things done, you have to take on a leadership role or try to help, do a teamwork collaboration, but you're not doing that in a way of you're someone's manager or you're someone's boss and you're going to tell them that they have to do this and they're going to do it. That's not how the dynamic works in an open source community. And when people do that, oftentimes they'll find, that's not going to get them very far. So her talk was kind of saying, pointing out some of a little bit of commiseration, but also recognition of kind of how do we do these kind of things in open source communities? What are the best practices? What things work well? What things don't work very well? And I think, in this kind of role, in terms of doing things in a community, one of my biggest challenges a lot of times is that there's so many things that I could be doing that I probably should be doing at any given point. But one of the biggest things is, and this is where I feel like that idea, what is a community architect kind of comes in, is that ultimately as an architect, your goal isn't to necessarily build the building, right? You're a designer. You're kind of shaping, what is this supposed to look like? How is this going to work? You're trying to model it all out in advance. You're kind of trying to lay the blueprints of how things are going to work. And I think as a community architect, that's kind of a similar thing of, not necessarily that I go out and I run all the meetings and I try to organize all the teams, but ultimately that I try to help empower other people to, understand how are the best ways that we work in Fedora? How does it work to run a special interest group or a working group? How do you, coordinate with the marketing team and the design team for an event? So, I try to be an enabler in a lot of ways for other people being successful in the community. So it's a different approach because, sometimes, there might be something where like, oh, like I know this could take me 5 or 10 minutes to do, but we have this approach in Fedora, which is, similar to other types of these, what is Mozilla has coined as like a wide open type of communities, where we really value like that getting someone onboarded and making a contribution to the project can sometimes be more valuable than the actual contribution itself, because you're trying to onboard people into that ecosystem. So all this to say, this is how like I kind of see my role as a community architect like playing out in these spaces. So I try not to get too hands-on with things. I try to keep try to be a resource for people to get help and guidance and support when they need it, but ultimately trying to like be at it from a little higher level. Now I have various points where I'm probably more or less successful on that on any given day, but that's the approach. That's the inspiration there. Now your question that I was bringing this back to, you have to refresh me here.
So you've taken this higher level look. You sort of try to connect people with others, try and engage people, bring people into the community. And the question that I wanted to drive towards was, how can the community help you accomplish those goals? How can the community lean in and support like ComOps and the community architect role?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I mentioned earlier that there's an initiative that's been going on, like what we call community initiatives in Fedora. These are kind of like high level, fixed term objectives that a group of people are working toward to accomplish, say, over like a 12 to 18 month period. And the community operations team is in a reboot right now, going through one of these initiatives where we've really focused on redefining what the team structure looks like and making it more clear for people. Because one of the challenges with ComOps and why we lost our momentum around kind of 2019 and then the pandemic, I mean, if we're not going to count the pandemic, other things.
No one does.
Other than that tiny little part, we also like a lot. ComOps kind of started to mean a lot of different things for different people. It kind of assumed it took on a lot of responsibilities, and then it became hard for us to be focused as a team. So what we've done recently, together with the co-lead of this initiative, Robert Wright, is we've split the team off into kind of 2 main functions, which we call community experience or contributor experience or process improvement. I guess there's a little bit of a naming piece to work out there. Process improvement, let's say. And then the other part that we've called community social analysis. So this builds on our history as a team of kind of thinking about what were the things that we did well as a group and that made ComOps unique. One of those was that metrics and analytics piece, like what I mentioned with B. Padalkar, who did that FOSDEM report. Like that was really interesting work and actually helped us learn something about an event that is really hard to actually learn about. Understanding your engagement and feedback, especially in a community context. So this community social analysis part is trying to build on that history that we had as a team of, we have all this data about our services and infrastructure and our tooling in the project, but we aren't always doing a great job of using that to help us be more efficient and effective. Like we've got these pieces in there, but they're not always well understood. So the goal with the community social analysis piece is to try to help empower people to know, like, hey, like if you want to play around with this data, like here's some common tools and here's how you do it. Here's the best practices to, work with, if you're working with data science tools like Jupyter notebooks or that kind of world of things, like making it easy for you to plug in with like, here's what the resources you need to start working with some of the Fedora data sources, but also like saying like, hey, these are some things that we're interested in learning about. For example, like one of the questions that we were talking about in our meeting that we had this morning actually was about like how many unique usernames appeared in the Fedora contributor or the Fedora messaging bus across all of our apps and infrastructure. Like how many unique names appeared during the Fedora Linux 40 release cycle? Like how many, and as another way of answering, like, how many people helped contribute to Fedora Linux 40.
Right.
So, that's one of those things that, and that's we've got a good first issue open for this. So if that's something you'd be interested in, we'd love to have you come by the GitLab issue tracker for the community ops team, where we keep all of our tickets and kind of ongoing work, which I think would probably be an easier segue. If you are looking just to look at a catalog of things to do, we've got like some 30 odd issues open there of just things that we're thinking about that anybody could just jump in and pick up on. But that's on the community social analytics piece. I mentioned there's this kind of contributor experience, process improvement piece. And probably the hallmark part of this one is trying to make the virtual event capacity a part of the community operations team. Specifically with the release parties is kind of the point and case example here.
Right.
Which we started to do in Fedora Linux 40, moving that into more of like a team-based approach. We had lots of different people who volunteered across kind of 4 different thematic areas of the event, from event production, which this year meant like setting up Matrix and working with all of our platforms and kind of configuring the live stream end of things. We had speaker management, coordinating with all of our speakers and getting them scheduled and making it clear, making sure everyone knew what was going to happen and when, building out the schedule. We had design. We always have an amazing group of designers in Fedora. We're so lucky to have our design team because they make such beautiful things for us in Fedora. So they were a big part of it, from our kind of event identity and doing all the logos for the Matrix rooms and some of the YouTube featured image that appears when you go on the channel. They help with some of that work. And then definitely the fourth one, I can never get all 4 of these at the same time. I always get like 3 of them, and then I forget the fourth one. It's event production, speaker management, design, and content and outreach. So that would be like your marketing work, doing the blogs, doing some social media. And so we had a great group of folks. It was a small group. This is the first time that we really were trying to build a team around organizing the event. But I think it went really well. And we learned some things that worked. We learned some things that went well, and we learned some things that didn't work well, because also it was our first time using Matrix. Well, for the release party. The Creative Freedom Summit people have been doing it for a while. So, we're just trying to catch up to those folks. But it went really well. And for Fedora Linux 41, we're going to keep going with that. So like in terms of like a virtual event, it's a little bit of ways from now. First, we got to get through Flock, but come late October, early November, we're going to start, well, before then, that's going to be when the party happens. We're going to do the Fedora Linux 41 release. We're going to have a party, but probably sometime like in late August, early September, we're going to start trying to get people together who want to help out and get involved with throwing our big party that we do twice a year in Fedora. So I'd say like these are 2 great ways to get involved with kind of what's happening in the community operations world. So if you're a data nerd, or you're someone who really likes to play around with this kind of stuff, but you just don't know how it works in Fedora, like we've got folks who can help you kind of play around with the data resources that we have, help you understand what our infrastructure and tooling is like, where you go to get which things. There's still some work ongoing to make that easier, but if that's kind of your like passion point, like we would love to have you be a part of the conversation and help us kind of think through how we do this in a sustained, focused way. So we're kind of like proving out our concept for this new team identity. But if you're also someone who's like, I'm not necessarily an engineer, I don't want to spend a lot of time doing data science or data analytics, you can come help us throw parties, like just be a party planner with Fedora. And join us for the virtual release parties. And our hope is also that we're starting with the release parties for that. But now that we're going to Matrix and we're using our own infrastructure for this, really trying to come up with a model of like, say that, anyone wants to do a virtual event in the community. Maybe Boot C wants to do like a Boot C kind of demo day. Like we'd love to make it easy for like a team to be like, hey, we want to do in 3 months from now, we want to do on this Friday, this little 3-hour event. And we have a team of people who can actually help like plan and coordinate and do that kind of work. I think that's more the long-term vision. But the idea is that starting now with the release parties, we can get a really good recipe of like how to run those events. And then we can help work with other people in the community to share what we've learned and help other people be successful.
I love that. So we're coming up on time, and I wanted to open up the floor and just say, is there because there's a whole pile of questions we didn't get to today. Uh, and well, what I'm hearing is just an excuse to bring you back on in the future to talk about sort of forward-looking things. Like we didn't even touch on the Fedora 2028 strategy, but with just a couple minutes left, what would you tell other communities, folks that obviously you talked about Fedora learning from other communities, other events, other conferences. What's something that you've learned with Fedora's community that you would want to pass forward to someone else?
It's a great question. For me, I think it really comes down to the culture of our community, the way people interact with each other and how we treat each other in our community. Like I mentioned earlier, the Freedom Friends features this, the Freedom Friends features first. Friends has always been a really important part of Fedora, but really like the group of people that we do this on, like really matters a lot to us as a project. And if I look back on my career, when I showed up in Rochester 9 years ago as this wide-eyed freshman kid who was trying to like get an idea of like what's happening in this open source Fedora world, like I've come to realize how unique of a thing that is that we have in Fedora. Like I said, I got to do a couple of other things in my career before I ended up kind of getting to do Fedora as a full-time focus. But I've always just felt so privileged by the experiences I've had and the people I've gotten to work with. It's taught me a lot about, and I'm not saying Fedora is perfect. There's a lot of things that we don't do great at in Fedora. And I could have a whole episode if I want to be pessimistic about it, but I'm not. But there's a lot of things that we do really well. And how we work together as a community has always been one of those like hallmark pieces. And I have throughout my career, I have like pulled back things I've done in Fedora and applied them to other parts of my career, and use the things that I figured out in Fedora and helped me be successful in other ways and be understand kind of what open source can be when it's working in this kind of big global dynamic that we have in Fedora. So it really, to me, I think if I could pass anything on, I'd just say like, let's keep being an amazing community. Just like you said, how inclusive and welcoming the community was. Like, that's how I always want Fedora to be. And I feel like if when the day comes, if I go on from Fedora and go on to something else, like if I feel like if that's the way we are as a community, I'll feel like we're in a really great place.
I love that. And I mean, now more than any time in my career over the last 20 some odd years, it's a matter of now's the time and here's the place and these are the people that need to step up. I mean, we look at things like AI and how that's impacting. We're looking at more and more of our globe being connected through the internet. We're looking at more division and more hostility, needless hostility online. Just there's so much going on right now. AI can be a wonderful addition to the tech stack. Being more connected I can't say only, but being more connected to more people with more free access to information, just there's so many positives right now. And I think Fedora's, I can't say uniquely, I think Fedora is well positioned to influence that in a positive way.
We do have a Fedora way of doing things, and I for better and for worse, but I really have come to love that about our community.
Yeah, at my day job we have hairballs that we call them red hat hairballs, and we're frequently trying to unravel those hairballs, but it's part of the charm, or the thing that drives me mad, and you end up curled up in the corner in the fetal position. One or the other, or both. So it's great to see sort of the corporate aspect, but also see the community aspect as well. So Justin, I really appreciate you being on. And I wanted to address a couple of comments real quick. First of all, yes, I know why I'm wearing a CentOS shirt. I got a message on the side here. It's like, yes, this is a CentOS t-shirt, but hey, we're all one big open source family. So actually
We
didn't
like our
even think
CentOS
about
friends. There's going to be a CentOS and Friends track at Flock
There you
on
go.
Thursday. So
There you go. I'm promoting that track for Flock. There we go. I love it.
I love it.
Not sure if that's the truth, but that's what we're going with. And second of all, I know our schedule has been a little crazy. I've been thinking about the podcast, been thinking about how we can do more. He couldn't join us today, but we've got a growing group of people that are helping with the podcast, particularly around the logistics. Thank you so much to Joseph and Justin. You've been a huge help as well as we're trying to get this thing stabilized. Doesn't help that I've got a crazy schedule the last couple of months, and I'm counting down the days, 27, until our kids are back in school. It'll bring some sanity to our life, but with that,
let me also just say a quick thanks to you, Eric, because I think it's really special that we have this podcast in the community and giving people a chance to have a platform to share their stories and the voices of our community. This is a really important work too, and I spend a lot of time. I try to kind of avoid being in the spotlight too much, so this is kind of a little different for me, but I really like to have these kind of spaces in the community for people to be involved and have a voice in the project. So thank you for being a huge driver of making these spaces in the community.
For sure. And like Edward and Grayson before me, there's a lot of work that goes into a podcast. I've been told, and I found it true, that if you think about starting a podcast, step back, calculate how much time you think it's going to take, and then triple it, and you might be close. And it's so true. So we've got a great group of folks. I know it's not directly related to community operations, but I feel like podcast and the marketing team is a big part of what we do. So definitely hoping to figure out some ways we can shake things up. We might change the live time, thinking like Friday at lunch, just because kind of end of the week, something fun to kind of wind down with. So that might be a little bit easier on scheduling guests and whatnot, but we've got some thoughts. But one of the reasons why I tacked this onto the end of the episode was just, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening. There's just tons of content out there, and there's so many things you can talk about. So thank you or so many things you can listen to. So thank you for being a part of the Fedora community. Thank you for being part of our audience. Make sure, if you haven't already, to hit subscribe. That way you get notified anytime we go live. Or if you're catching the audio version, make sure that you hit follow on your podcast player. If you didn't find us, then you wouldn't be hearing this anyway. So, it's just. So if you have someone who is interested in Fedora or interested in becoming part of Linux or open source or just a community in general, be sure to share this content with them. We'd really appreciate it, and really would appreciate some feedback. I'm looking at ways that I can be more engaging as a host, instead of just sitting here for 45 minutes and just rapid firing questions at poor Justin here. But to be a little bit better informed, we're looking at ways to fix scheduling. We've got such a long list of topics. We need people to step forward and be a guest. So I was kind of thinking on the side, maybe we need a badge for I've been a podcast guest. So I think that'd be a fun way to get people engaged.
I think we have a badge. I will hook you up.
That would be great. I mean, we got the cool.
It might be from the early days.
We got the cool logo. We need it in a badge.
Yes. I will let you know about that one, because I know that one is floating out there in the ocean of badges in Fedora. There is a podcast.
There's so many. But so thank you, Justin, for being my guest today. I really appreciate it. And on behalf of the Fedora project and all of you listening, thank you for sharing some time with us. Really appreciate it. And we're trying to get an episode scheduled for 2 weeks out, which is in the middle of Flock. So I'm trying to pre-record something, because I know our contributor team will be very busy with the event. So we may or may not have an episode in 2 weeks. And if we do, it'll probably be pre-recorded. But if not, we'll be back in 4 weeks for sure. We'll be talking about Bootsy and the Fedora project. In fact, I'm talking to a couple of Red Hatters who are involved in the Fedora, or that are involved in the Bootsy project as well. So we might do like a two-parter and take a look at it from both the community and an enterprise perspective. Still playing with that idea, but definitely join us on Matrix and share your ideas, share your thoughts and opinions. Would really appreciate the help. I've rambled on long enough, so Justin, thank you for being our guest today. And until next time, we'll see you around in the Fedora community.